"You're being dramatic. You're always overreacting. My mother had 5 kids and never complained like this." These were the last words Jack Morrison said to his 6 months pregnant wife before he went to sleep that night. The last words before she sat alone in the darkness, her body screaming with pain he refused to acknowledge, and prayed a prayer born from absolute desperation. "Dear Lord, let him understand what I'm feeling. Let him carry what I'm carrying. Let him know." She woke up the next morning with a flat stomach. He woke up 6 months pregnant. What happened next would break him, humble him, and ultimately transform him in ways that only the most visceral suffering can achieve. Because for the next 3 months, Jack would experience every symptom, every pain, every humiliation, every sleepless night, every moment of invisible agony that he had dismissed as his wife being weak, and she would give him exactly what he had given her, nothing. This is the story of the weight she carried, the weight he never saw, and the lesson that would change him forever. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you. There are moments in life when desperation becomes prayer, when suffering transforms into something so unbearable that the impossible starts to feel like the only answer. This is the story of a woman who carried more than just a child inside her. She carried the weight of being unseen, unheard, and utterly alone in the one experience that should have brought her closest to the person she loved. What happened next would teach one man a lesson he would never forget, a truth that would reshape everything he thought he knew about strength, sacrifice, and what it truly means to carry life. She was 6 months pregnant and in pain. Real, bone-deep, relentless pain that had become her constant companion. Emma Johnson sat on the edge of their bed at 2 a.m, both hands pressed against her lower back where the ache had settled like a knife lodged between her vertebrae. The baby, their daughter, was pressing against her sciatic nerve again, sending shooting pains down her right leg that made her gasp every time she tried to stand. Her feet were so swollen, they looked like they belonged to someone else. The skin stretched tight and shiny. Her ankles completely disappeared into puffy flesh that hurt to touch. She'd taken off her wedding ring 3 weeks ago because her fingers had swollen so much the ring was cutting off circulation, leaving an angry red indentation in her skin. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than an hour without waking. The baby seemed most active at night, performing what felt like gymnastics against Emma's bladder, her ribs, every internal organ. And when the baby wasn't moving, Emma's body found other ways to keep her awake. The heartburn that sent acid burning up her throat no matter what she ate. The leg cramps that seized her calves with pain so intense she'd cry out. The constant need to urinate because the baby was sitting directly on her bladder. Her back hurt constantly, not just when she moved or stood too long, but every single moment. A grinding ache that radiated from her lower spine, through her hips and down her legs. The relaxin hormone had loosened all her joints in preparation for birth, which meant her pelvis felt unstable, like her bones were barely holding together. Every step sent sharp pain through her pubic bone. Walking from the bedroom to the bathroom, maybe 15 feet, had become an ordeal that left her breathing hard and fighting tears. That night, the night everything changed, Emma had called out to Jack from the bedroom, her voice strained with pain. The baby was pressing on her ribs so hard she couldn't take a full breath, and the shooting pain down her leg had intensified to the point where she genuinely wasn't sure she could make it to the bathroom alone. Jack Morrison appeared in the doorway, still dressed in his work clothes, looking annoyed at being interrupted from his laptop. "What is it now, Em?" The words, the tone, cut deeper than any physical pain. Emma tried to explain. The baby was in a bad position. She needed help getting up. The pain was unbearable. Jack actually rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic again," he said, frustration sharp in his voice. "My sister just had twins and she didn't complain half as much. Maybe if you exercised more or ate better, you wouldn't feel so bad. You're always overreacting." He walked away, back to his laptop, back to his evening, leaving Emma sitting on the edge of the bed with tears streaming down her face. She somehow managed to get herself to the bathroom, one hand pressed against the wall for support, each step agony. When she finally made it back to bed, Jack was already there, scrolling through his phone, not looking at her. Within minutes, he was snoring softly while Emma lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, her body screaming with discomfort, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her entire life. That's when something inside Emma broke. She looked at her husband sleeping peacefully beside her, completely unburdened by the pregnancy consuming her every moment, and she felt a surge of desperate need for him to understand. She'd tried talking, tried explaining, tried asking for support. None of it had worked. He couldn't or wouldn't see her suffering because it was invisible to him, abstract, something he could minimize because he wasn't experiencing it himself. Emma placed one hand on her swollen belly, feeling their daughter shift inside her. With her other hand, she reached over and gently touched Jack's arm. Then she prayed. Not the polite formal prayer of church services, but the raw, desperate prayer of someone who has reached the absolute end of their endurance. "Dear Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "I wish my husband could be the one to experience this. I wish he could feel what I feel, carry what I carry, understand what he refuses to see. Please, let him know what this is like." For just a moment, Emma felt a strange warmth spread from her hands, a tingling sensation that traveled through her body and seemed to flow into Jack. The baby gave one strong kick, and then Emma fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. Emma woke the next morning to an absence of pain so shocking it jolted her fully awake. She sat up in bed, actually sat up, quickly and easily, without the careful maneuvering she'd needed for months, and looked down at her body. Her stomach was flat. The enormous tight swell of her 6-month pregnancy belly was completely gone. She could see her feet. She could bend forward. She touched her stomach with trembling hands, feeling for the baby, but there was nothing. Panic started to rise. Where was her baby? But then she heard a sound from the bathroom that made her freeze. Retching. The unmistakable sound of someone vomiting, followed by a groan that was distinctly Jack's voice, but with a quality she'd never heard before. Confusion, fear, and pain all mixed together. Emma stood up, and the ease of standing was almost as shocking as her flat stomach. No grinding pain in her hips, no shooting pain down her leg, no weight pressing on her bladder. She walked to the bathroom normally, easily, her body her own again. She pushed open the bathroom door and gasped out loud. Jack was pregnant. There was no other word for what she was seeing. His normally flat stomach had swelled into an unmistakable 6-month pregnancy belly, not bloating or weight gain, but the specific, undeniable shape of pregnancy, complete with taut stretched skin, a protruding belly button, even the dark line of linea nigra running down the center of his stomach. Jack looked up at her, his face pale and slick with sweat, one hand clutching his stomach, eyes wide with terror. "Em," he gasped, "something's really wrong. I woke up and I felt sick and my back is killing me and I can't breathe right." And he looked down at his belly, touched it with both hands, then looked back up with pure panic. "What the hell is happening to me? I need to go to the hospital. Stomachs don't just grow overnight." Emma stood in the doorway, emotions crashing through her, shock, disbelief, and underneath it all, something that felt uncomfortably close to satisfaction. Her prayer had been answered. She looked at her flat stomach, then at Jack's swollen one, and knew with absolute certainty what had happened. The pregnancy had transferred. "I think," Emma said slowly, "you're pregnant." Jack stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "That's not possible. Men don't get pregnant. I have a tumor or something. Internal bleeding. We need to call 911. Another wave of nausea hit him, and he turned back to the toilet, dry heaving. Emma recognized that feeling intimately. The morning sickness that was actually all-day sickness, that left you exhausted and unable to keep anything down. "It's not a tumor," Emma said quietly. "You're carrying our baby now." Jack managed to pull himself to his feet, one hand braced against the sink, the other supporting his belly. The movement was awkward, pained. Emma saw him wince as he straightened, saw his hand fly to his lower back with a gasp. She knew that pain, the sciatic nerve compressed by the baby, sending lightning bolts of agony down the leg. "This is insane," Jack said, staring at his reflection with horror. "This isn't real. This can't be real. I'm dreaming. This is a nightmare." But it wasn't a nightmare. Over the next hours, as shock wore off and reality set in, Jack discovered exactly how real pregnancy was. The nausea came in waves, unpredictable and overwhelming. His back pain was constant and severe, that grinding ache in the lower spine that no position relieved. And his feet, by mid-morning, they'd started to swell, the skin tightening, his shoes suddenly too small. He tried to put on his work shoes and couldn't get them past his puffy ankles. The look of horror on his face was almost comical. "I have that big presentation today," he said, still in denial. "I need to go to work. I need to—" He tried to stand from the couch and gasped, his hand flying to his belly. Emma, watching from the kitchen where she was making herself breakfast for the first time in weeks without feeling nauseous, knew what he was feeling. Braxton Hicks contractions, practice contractions that tightened the belly and caused sharp discomfort. Jack looked at her with desperation. "Help me, please. Something's really wrong. We need to figure out how to fix this." Emma took a bite of her toast, chewed slowly. "Fix what?" she asked calmly. "You're pregnant. Women are pregnant for 9 months. It's natural. Nothing to fix." She saw realization dawn on his face. This wasn't just about being pregnant. This was about him finally experiencing what she'd been going through, what he'd dismissed and minimized for 6 months. "You did this," he said, accusation and disbelief in his voice. "Last night. Change it back. I can't. I have work. I have a life. I can't be pregnant." Emma set down her toast and looked at him directly. "I had work too. I had a life too. Remember? I had to quit my teaching job because being pregnant made everything impossible. Because the exhaustion was so overwhelming I couldn't function. But you said I was being dramatic. You said your mother worked through her pregnancies. You said I was overreacting." Jack's face went through several expressions: anger, fear, frustration. "This is different. I'm a man. People will think I'm crazy. I can't go out looking like this. What am I supposed to tell people?" Emma felt coldness settle in her chest. "Tell them you're pregnant. Tell them you're carrying a baby. Tell them what I had to tell everyone for the past 6 months while you acted like nothing had changed." The first day was a revelation in suffering. Jack tried to maintain his routine and discovered nothing was normal anymore. He couldn't find clothes that fit. His work pants wouldn't button. His shirt strained across his belly. He settled on sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that did nothing to hide his condition. He attempted to work from home, opened his laptop, and within 20 minutes was back in the bathroom with another wave of nausea. The heartburn started around noon, a burning sensation that rose from his chest into his throat, making him feel like his esophagus was on fire. He took antacids. Emma pointed him to the drawer where she'd been keeping her supply, but they barely helped. By evening, his feet had swollen so much he couldn't even wear slippers. The skin was tight and shiny, and when he pressed his finger into the flesh, it left an indentation that took minutes to fade. "This is edema," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Fluid retention, completely normal in pregnancy. Should go down after you give birth." "After I give birth?" Jack's voice went high with panic. "I can't give birth. I don't have the parts for that. The baby can't—" He stopped, the full implication finally hitting him. Pregnancy didn't just end, it led somewhere terrifying that his male body couldn't possibly accommodate. Emma saw fear wash over his face and felt the tiniest twinge of sympathy. But only tiny. He'd had 6 months to show her compassion. Now it was his turn to be afraid. That night, Jack discovered the impossibility of sleep. Every position was uncomfortable. On his back, the baby's weight pressed on his spine. On his side, his hips ached from a relaxing hormone that had loosened his joints. His compressed bladder gave him maybe 20 minutes before he had to get up and pee again. And every time he got up, the process was agony. Careful maneuvering to get out of bed, slow walk to the bathroom with one hand supporting his belly and the other pressed against his back. Then the exhaustion of having to find a comfortable position all over again. Emma, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, woke once to use the bathroom, a normal, quick trip, and found Jack sitting on the edge of the bed, his face in his hands, quietly crying. "I can't do this," he whispered. "I can't do 9 months of this. I can't." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to comfort him, but a larger part remembered all the times she'd sat in this exact spot, crying from pain and exhaustion, while he'd been too busy or indifferent to notice. "You'll do it," she said simply, "because you don't have a choice, just like I didn't." The days that followed were a masterclass in pregnancy's reality. Jack woke each morning feeling like he'd been hit by a truck, every muscle aching, his back screaming, his body so tired that getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. The nausea was unpredictable. Some mornings it was manageable. Other mornings he couldn't keep down even water, spent hours in the bathroom, emerged pale and shaking. Emma would watch him, her face impassive, and make comments that echoed his own words. Maybe if you drank more water, you'd feel better. Have you tried ginger? My friend's husband had a stomach bug and still went to work. The physical changes kept coming, relentless and humiliating. Jack's breasts began to swell, becoming tender and sensitive. He'd bump into a door frame and gasp with pain. Stretch marks appeared on his belly, angry red lines marking where his skin was stretching beyond capacity. His belly button popped out like a timer on a turkey. He stared at it in horror, poked at it, couldn't push it back in. His body was no longer his own, and he had no control over any of it. The swelling got worse. His feet by day's end were so puffy he couldn't recognize them. His ankles had disappeared entirely. His fingers swelled too, sausage-like and stiff, making it hard to type. His face got puffy, features softening and blurring. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Eyes ringed with dark circles, face swollen, belly protruding, skin stretched and marked. He looked like someone who was suffering, and he was. The baby's movements became more pronounced, and this was perhaps the strangest part, to feel another life inside him, moving independently, pressing against him from the inside, was so alien that sometimes he'd just sit with his hands on his belly, trying to process the impossibility. The baby would press against his ribs, hard, persistent pressure that made it impossible to breathe deeply, or kick his bladder, sending him racing to the bathroom, or perform what felt like somersaults in the middle of the night, keeping him awake with uncomfortable sensations he had no control over. Emma, meanwhile, treated him exactly as he had treated her, and the reversal was devastating in its precision. When Jack complained about pain, she'd remind him pregnancy was natural, that billions of women had done this. When he asked for help, she'd suggest he was being dramatic. When he wanted sympathy, she'd compare him to other pregnant people who had it worse. When he tried to explain how hard it was, she'd nod absently and change the subject, exactly as he had done to her for 6 months. "Could you help me put on my shoes?" Jack asked one morning, unable to bend past his belly. Emma glanced over from where she was getting ready. She'd started freelance work online, enjoying the ability to sit at her computer without discomfort. "You're not working today. You have all day. I'm sure you can figure it out." Jack stared at her. "I literally can't reach my feet. The baby is in the way." Emma shrugged. "Maybe prop your foot up on something. You'll figure it out." And she left, leaving him to struggle alone, exactly as she had struggled. By 7 months, Jack had stopped trying to maintain any semblance of his old life. He couldn't work. Exhaustion and discomfort made concentration impossible. He couldn't go out. The stares, the questions, the disbelief when people saw a visibly pregnant man was too much. He was isolated, trapped in their apartment, trapped in a body that felt like a prison. He'd lie on the couch for hours, too uncomfortable to move, too tired to do anything. One hand always on his belly because the baby's movements were constant now. The symptoms kept escalating. Hemorrhoids appeared, painful and humiliating. Constipation became a constant battle. The baby pressing on his intestines, slowing everything down. His sense of smell became hypersensitive. Suddenly every scent was overwhelming, nauseating. Emma would cook and Jack would have to leave the room, the smell making him gag. He developed carpal tunnel in his wrists from fluid retention, waking with his hands numb. His hips ached constantly. His pubic bone felt like it was separating, sending sharp pains through his pelvis every time he moved. The emotional toll was just as severe. Jack had always taken pride in his strength, his capability, his independence. Pregnancy stripped all of that away. He needed help for basic tasks. He needed assistance getting in and out of the bathtub. He needed Emma to pick things up because he couldn't bend down. He needed support walking because his balance was off, and his loosened joints made him unsteady. He felt weak, helpless, dependent, and hated every second. And underneath it all was growing terror about what was coming. the birth his body couldn't possibly handle. At 8 months, the baby dropped lower in his pelvis, preparing for birth, and the pressure on his bladder became unbearable. He was in the bathroom every 15 minutes, sometimes barely making it, sometimes not making it at all. The humiliation of incontinence, of having to wear pads, broke something in him. He sat on the bathroom floor after one accident, sobbing, his hand pressed against his enormous belly, and Emma found him there. For a moment, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she knelt beside him, easily, without pain. "I know," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't quite cold anymore. "I know how hard this is. I know how helpless you feel. I know what it's like to have your body completely out of your control. I know because I lived it while you watched and did nothing." Jack looked up at her, his face wet with tears, and for the first time, he didn't try to defend himself. He just nodded. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Em. I didn't understand. I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't know it was this hard, and I'm still only at 8 months. You did this for 9. You did this while I called you dramatic, while I told you you were overreacting, while I left you to suffer alone. I'm so sorry." Emma was quiet for a long moment. She'd been waiting for this apology, this acknowledgement, but now that it was here, she didn't feel the satisfaction she'd expected. She just felt tired. "I know you're sorry," she said finally. "But sorry doesn't erase what you put me through. Sorry doesn't give me back those 6 months when I needed you and you weren't there. Sorry doesn't fix the loneliness, the fear, the feeling that I didn't matter." At 38 weeks and 6 days, Jack woke at 3 in the morning to wetness between his legs and a tightening in his belly that felt different. His water had broken. This was it. The terror was so overwhelming he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then another contraction hit, stronger than any practice one, wrapping around his belly like a vice, and he cried out. Emma woke instantly, saw the wetness, understood immediately. "It's time," she said, and there was urgency in her voice now, but also a tenderness that had been missing for months. The contractions came faster than either expected. Within 2 hours, Jack was in full labor, contractions 3 minutes apart, lasting over a minute each, pain unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was all-consuming, radiating from his back through his belly, down his legs, taking over his entire body. Between contractions, he'd gasp for breath, try to prepare, then it would hit and he'd be lost in it, could do nothing but breathe and endure and survive. Emma was there through all of it. She timed contractions, helped him breathe through them, rubbed his back when he needed it. She was the partner she'd needed, the partner he hadn't been. And even through his pain, Jack recognized the grace in that. When the pain got so bad, he thought he couldn't take any more. When he begged for it to stop, she held his hand and told him he was strong enough, that he could do this, that it would be over soon. The birth itself was a blur of pain and pushing, and the primal, terrifying experience of his body doing something it shouldn't be able to do. There were moments when Jack thought he would die, moments when the pain seemed literally unbearable, moments when he understood why women talked about labor as the hardest thing they'd ever done. And then, after hours that felt like years, there was a cry, high and angry and absolutely perfect. And their daughter was there, being placed on his chest, warm and wet and real. Jack looked down at her, this tiny person he'd carried inside him, and something broke open in his chest. All the pain, all the suffering, all the months of discomfort suddenly had a face, had a purpose, had meaning. He understood now why women did this, why they went through it, why they'd do it again despite everything. He understood the fierce, overwhelming love that makes any sacrifice worthwhile. And he understood, finally and completely, what Emma had gone through, what she had sacrificed, what she had endured while he'd dismissed her suffering. He looked up at Emma, standing beside him, looking down at their daughter, with tears streaming down her face, and he opened his mouth to speak, to apologize again, to try to find words for what he now understood. And then Jack woke up. He gasped, his eyes flying open, his heart pounding like he'd been running for miles. He was in their bed, in their bedroom, morning light filtering through the curtains. He sat up quickly, too quickly, the room spinning, and looked around wildly. His hands flew to his stomach, pressing against what he expected to be a swollen belly, but found only his normal, flat stomach. No pregnancy, no baby, No stretched skin or protruding belly button or any of it. He touched his face, his chest, his legs, checking that everything was normal, that he was back in his own body. His shirt was drenched with sweat, clinging to his skin. His face was wet, sweat or tears, he couldn't tell. His whole body was shaking. The dream, if it had been a dream, had felt so real. The pain had felt real. The exhaustion had felt real. The 9 months of suffering had felt real. The birth had felt real. All of it had been so vivid, so visceral, that for a moment he couldn't quite convince himself it hadn't actually happened. Jack turned his head and saw Emma lying beside him, still asleep, one hand resting protectively on her very pregnant belly. 6 months pregnant. The same as when he'd gone to sleep. The same as when he'd dismissed her pain, called her dramatic, left her crying on the edge of the bed. He stared at her, at the swell of her stomach where their daughter was growing, at the slight frown on her face even in sleep because pregnancy had made true rest impossible, at the way her hand curved protectively over their baby, even unconscious. His face softened as understanding washed over him. The dream, the vision, the experience, whatever it had been a gift, a terrible, painful gift, but a gift nonetheless. He'd been shown what he'd been too blind or selfish or indifferent to see. He'd experienced what Emma was experiencing. He'd felt what she felt. He'd carried what she carried. And now, awake in his own body, free from that suffering, he understood with absolute clarity what he'd been putting her through. Jack carefully got out of bed, moving quietly so as not to wake Emma. He went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, stared at his reflection. He looked the same as always, but he felt fundamentally changed. The dream had taught him something that months of Emma trying to explain had failed to convey. The reality of pregnancy, the weight of what women endure, the depth of strength it requires to carry life. He went back to the bedroom and sat gently on the edge of the bed, watching Emma sleep. Her breathing was slightly labored because the baby was pressing on her lungs. Even in sleep, her face showed discomfort. Her feet, sticking out from under the blanket, were swollen. Dark circles under her eyes spoke to many sleepless nights, while he'd slept peacefully beside her, oblivious. How had he been so blind? How had he looked at this woman he claimed to love and not seen her pain? Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open, landing on Jack. For a moment, confusion crossed her face, then wariness, as if expecting another dismissive comment. Jack reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Em. I've been terrible to you. I've been dismissive and cruel and completely unsupportive. You've been going through one of the hardest experiences a person can go through, and instead of being there for you, I've made it worse. I'm sorry." Emma stared at him, trying to process this sudden change. "What brought this on?" she asked carefully. Jack shook his head. "I had a dream. Or maybe it was more than a dream. I felt what you're feeling. I carried what you're carrying. And Em, I don't know how you're doing this. I don't know how any woman does this. The pain, the exhaustion, the way your body stops being your own. It's so much harder than I ever imagined. And you've been doing it while I criticized you for complaining." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You really mean this?" she whispered. "This isn't just you saying what you think I want to hear?" Jack squeezed her hand gently. "I really mean it. And I'm going to prove it, starting right now. Tell me what you need. Tell me how I can help. Tell me what would make this easier for you, and I'll do it, I promise." From that morning forward, Jack became the partner Emma had desperately needed. He helped her out of bed in the mornings when the pain in her hips made movement difficult, supporting her weight and moving slowly, patiently. He took over household chores without being asked, cooking, cleaning, laundry, understanding, now that what looked like her just sitting on the couch was actually her body performing the exhausting work of building a human being. When she needed the bathroom in the middle of the night, he'd wake up with her, help her to her feet, wait outside the door to help her back to bed. He didn't complain, he didn't sigh with impatience, he was just there. He started really listening when she talked about her symptoms. When she mentioned heartburn, he researched remedies, bought different antacids, propped up their mattress so she could sleep at an incline. When she said her feet were swelling, he filled a basin with warm water every evening and massaged her feet, elevating them afterward. When she couldn't reach past her belly to tie her shoes, he knelt down and did it without making her feel helpless. When the shooting pain from her sciatic nerve made her cry out, he was there immediately, helping her find relief, applying heat or cold, rubbing her lower back with patient, gentle hands. He went with her to every doctor's appointment now, not just showing up, but being present, asking questions, taking notes, learning about what was happening in her body. When the doctor talked about the baby's position or Emma's blood pressure or measurements tracking their daughter's growth, Jack listened intently, his hand holding Emma's, his attention fully on understanding what she was experiencing. The doctor noticed the change, commented on it, and Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest. Pride, maybe, or hope, or the beginning of healing. He started doing the things he should have been doing all along. He'd come home from work and immediately ask how she was feeling. Really ask. Really want to know. When she said she'd had a hard day, he didn't compare it to his own or minimize her experience. He'd just listen, validate, offer comfort. He'd prepare meals that were gentle on her stomach, cutting food into small pieces because her heartburn made eating difficult. He'd run out at odd hours to get whatever she was craving. He'd sit with her during the bad nights when sleep wouldn't come, not sleeping either, just being present so she wouldn't feel alone. The emotional support was perhaps even more important than the physical help. Jack started telling Emma how strong she was, how amazing her body was for growing their daughter. He'd praise her for getting through difficult days, acknowledge how hard this was, remind her that what she was doing mattered. When she felt ugly, and she did feel ugly, her body so changed, stretch marks appearing, her face puffy, her hair losing its shine, he'd tell her she was beautiful, that she was creating life, that there was nothing more incredible, and he meant it. After experiencing it himself in that vivid dream, he saw pregnancy not as something to be endured quietly, but as an act of profound strength and sacrifice. At 7 months, Emma had a particularly bad day. The baby was pressing on her sciatic nerve so badly she could barely walk. Every step sent shooting pains down her right leg. She'd spent most of the day in bed, tears streaming down her face from relentless pain. Jack came home, saw her state immediately, and without hesitation took the rest of the week off. He spent those days caring for her completely, helping her to the bathroom, bringing her meals in bed, massaging her leg and back, applying heat packs, just being there. He didn't make her feel guilty. He didn't act put out. He was just present, the partner she'd needed all along. "Why didn't you do this before?" Emma asked him one night during that difficult week, her voice quiet, not accusing but genuinely curious. "Why did it take so long?" Jack was quiet for a moment, gently rubbing her swollen feet. "I think I was scared," he said finally. Scared of the change, scared of the responsibility, scared of what it meant that our lives were about to be different. And instead of dealing with that fear, I minimized what you were experiencing. If I could tell myself pregnancy wasn't that hard, that you were being dramatic, then I didn't have to face how serious this was, how much everything was about to change. I was selfish and cowardly, and you paid the price. The honesty meant something to Emma. He wasn't making excuses. He was owning what he'd done, understanding why, and working to be different. That mattered. It didn't erase the past, didn't heal the hurt immediately, but it was a foundation they could build on. "I don't know if I can forget how alone I felt," Emma said quietly. "Those first 6 months, I felt so invisible. Like I was going through something monumental, and you couldn't be bothered to notice. That kind of hurt doesn't just disappear." Jack nodded, his eyes wet. "I know. I don't expect you to forget. I don't expect instant forgiveness. I just want to show you every day that I see you now. I see you and I value you, and I will never leave you to suffer alone again." At 8 months, they started preparing for birth in earnest. Jack went with Emma to birthing classes, paying attention to every word. He learned how to be a birth partner, how to coach Emma through contractions, how to apply counter pressure to her back, how to advocate for her with medical staff, how to support her through what would be the most challenging experience of her life. He practiced breathing exercises with her, timed her practice contractions, helped her find positions that might make labor easier. He was preparing to be there for her in a way he should have been preparing all along. At 9 months, Emma was miserable in ways that made earlier months seem almost easy. The baby had dropped lower into her pelvis, which relieved pressure on her ribs, but created intense pressure on her bladder and made walking even more difficult. She felt like she was carrying a bowling ball between her legs. Her hips ached constantly. Her feet were so swollen she could only wear slip-on shoes. Sleep was nearly impossible. She couldn't find a comfortable position, had to pee every hour. And the baby seemed most active between 2 and 4 in the morning. Jack was there through all of it. On the nights when Emma couldn't sleep, he stayed awake with her, rubbing her back, talking quietly, keeping her company. When she broke down crying from exhaustion and discomfort, he held her and told her she was almost there, that she was so strong that soon they'd meet their daughter. When she felt like she couldn't take one more day, he reminded her that every day was one day closer, that her body knew what to do, that he'd be right there with her. He started telling her about that dream, that vivid experience that had changed everything. He'd describe what he'd felt, the constant pain, the exhaustion, the way every basic task became difficult, the loss of control over his own body. I only experienced it for one night, he'd say, but it felt like 9 months, and even that tiny taste was enough to change everything I thought I knew. You're doing something incredible, Em. You're doing something I couldn't do, something that requires more strength than I have. You're amazing. 3 days after her due date, Emma woke at 5 in the morning to her water breaking and a contraction that felt different from practice ones. Stronger, more purposeful, real. She woke Jack immediately, and he was up and alert instantly, fear and excitement on his face. "Is it time?" he asked, and Emma nodded, another contraction already building. "It's time." Jack was everything she needed during labor. When contractions got intense, he was there, breathing with her, coaching her, telling her she was strong enough, that she was doing great. When she wanted to walk, he walked with her, supporting her weight. When she wanted to rest, he helped her find positions that gave relief, applied counter pressure to her back, never leaving her side. When she snapped at him during transition, the hardest part when pain and exhaustion made patience impossible, he didn't take it personally, just kept supporting her, kept telling her she could do this. When it came time to push, when the pain reached levels Emma had never imagined possible, when she was convinced she couldn't do this, that it was too hard, that she wasn't strong enough, Jack held her hand and looked into her eyes and told her she was the strongest person he'd ever known, that she'd already done the impossible by carrying their daughter for 9 months, that these final moments were just one more thing she'd get through because that's who she was. He believed in her so completely that she started to believe in herself. And then, after hours of labor, after more pain and effort than Emma had known a human body could endure, their daughter was born, perfect and tiny and screaming with healthy lungs. The nurse placed her on Emma's chest, and Emma looked down at this little person she'd carried. She'd nourished with her own body. She'd brought into the world through sheer determination and strength. Jack was crying, big, unashamed tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and daughter, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and awe. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're amazing. You're so amazing, Em." Emma, exhausted and elated and overwhelmed, looked up at him and saw in his face the partner she'd always needed, the person he'd become through understanding her suffering. The first 6 months of her pregnancy had been lonely and painful in ways that had scarred her. But these last 3 months, she hadn't been alone. He'd been there, really there, and that mattered. Recovery was hard, the bleeding, the pain, the exhaustion of caring for a newborn. But Jack was there through all of it, just as he'd promised. He changed diapers and did night feedings with pumped milk. He took over all household work. He protected Emma's rest, understanding her body had been through trauma and needed time to heal. He took paternity leave, wanting to be present for these early weeks, wanting to support his wife and bond with his daughter. He'd learned that being a partner meant being present, meant sharing burdens, meant seeing and valuing the work that goes into sustaining life. One night, a few weeks after Grace was born, Jack and Emma sat together on the couch, their daughter sleeping between them. Emma looked over at her husband and saw him watching Grace with such tenderness, such love, such attention. "That dream you had," she said quietly, "the one that changed everything. Do you still remember it? Does it still feel real?" Jack looked up at her, his expression serious. "I remember every second of it, every pain, every uncomfortable moment, every time I felt helpless or scared or alone. And yes, it still feels real. More real than most things in my life. It showed me a truth I needed to see. It made me understand what I'd been too blind to see before. "I'm glad you had it," Emma said, and she meant it. "I'm glad something made you understand, even if I wish it hadn't taken that for you to see me, to see what I was going through." Jack nodded. "I wish I'd understood without it. I wish I'd been the partner you needed from the beginning, but I'm grateful for the lesson, however it came. And I promise you, Em, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible or alone again. You carried our daughter. You brought her into the world. You did something I literally couldn't do, something that requires more strength than I have. I see that now. I see you, and I will never stop seeing you." Emma felt tears on her cheeks, felt the complicated mix of emotions that came with forgiveness that was still being earned, with love that was being rebuilt, with trust that was slowly growing back. They weren't where they'd been before the pregnancy. That innocent, easier time felt like it belonged to different people. They were somewhere new, somewhere harder, but also more honest, more real. They'd been broken and were in the process of healing, and while the scars would always be there, they were learning to be partners in a deeper, truer way. Looking down at Grace sleeping peacefully between them, the product of Emma's sacrifice and strength and 9 months of carrying life, Emma thought about all the women who'd done this before her, all the women doing it right now, all the women who would do it in the future. She thought about how often their strength went unrecognized, their pain dismissed, their experiences minimized. She thought about all the partners who never learned what Jack had learned, who never understood what pregnancy really cost, who never saw the weight their wives and girlfriends carried alone. Their daughter stirred, made a soft sound, and both Emma and Jack reached for her at the same moment, their hands touching, their eyes meeting. In that look was everything they'd been through, everything they'd learned, everything they were still learning. Being parents, being partners, being people who'd been tested and had found, almost too late, but not quite, a way back to each other. "Thank you," Jack said softly, and Emma knew he meant thank you for giving birth. "Thank you for carrying our daughter. Thank you for being strong enough to do what I never could. Thank you for giving me a chance to be better." She squeezed his hand, and in that gesture was her own message. "Thank you for finally seeing me. Thank you for learning. Thank you for being here now. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was a beginning." Jack carried with him, always, the memory of that dream, that vivid, visceral experience of pregnancy that had opened his eyes when nothing else could. He'd carry it as a reminder, as a lesson, as a window into a reality that most men would never understand. He'd remember the swelling and the pain and the exhaustion and the loss of control. He'd remember what it felt like to suffer and have that suffering dismissed. And he'd remember, most of all, what it felt like to be invisible to the person who was supposed to love you most. That memory would shape him as a father, as a husband, as a man. It would make him teach his daughter about respecting women's experiences, about believing people when they say they're in pain, about the invisible labor that sustains families. It would make him speak up when he heard other men dismiss pregnancy as easy or natural or not a big deal. It would make him an advocate, an ally, a person who understood, as few men ever truly understand, the profound sacrifice of pregnancy and the strength it requires. As Grace slept between her parents, innocent of the journey that had brought her here, the morning light began to filter through the curtains. A new day, a new beginning, a family learning what it meant to see each other, to carry each other's burdens, to love not despite difficulty but through it, because of it, strengthened by it. 3 people rested together, a woman who had carried life, a man who had learned what that meant through the most powerful lesson of his life, and a baby girl who represented both the cost and the worth of the sacrifice required to bring new life into the world. And in homes across the country, in countless bedrooms just like this one, other women were waking to swollen feet and aching backs and the weight of carrying life while their partners slept peacefully beside them. Some of those partners would learn, as Jack had learned, others never would. But the lesson remained the same, that seeing someone suffering, believing their pain, supporting them through their hardest moments, these are not acts of extraordinary kindness. They are the basic requirements of love, the foundation of partnership, the least we owe each other. The story ends here, but the lesson continues. In every delivery room, In every home where a woman carries new life, in every moment when someone's invisible suffering goes unrecognized, the question remains, will we see each other? Will we believe each other? Will we carry each other's burdens as they carry ours? Jack learned the answer through a dream that felt more real than reality. Most people don't get that gift. Most people have to choose every day to see beyond their own experience, to imagine what they haven't felt, to honor what they can't fully understand. The weight Emma carried for 9 months was more than just physical. It was the weight of being dismissed, of suffering alone, of feeling that her pain didn't matter to the person who should have cared most. That weight, that invisible emotional burden, is what too many women carry alongside the physical demands of pregnancy. And when partners finally understand, when they finally see, when they finally carry their share of the burden, something miraculous happens. Not the miracle of life, though that is profound, but the miracle of two people becoming true partners, of love deepening through challenge, of families being built on foundations of mutual respect and shared sacrifice. That's the real story, not just of Emma and Jack, but of every couple learning what it means to face life's hardest moments together. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but together, seeing each other, believing each other, carrying each other. As the sun rose over their quiet apartment, Grace opened her eyes for the first time that morning, looked up at her parents with the unfocused gaze of a newborn, and made a small sound, not quite a cry, just an announcement of her presence. Both Emma and Jack looked down at her, and in that moment, they understood that this was what it had all been for. The pain, the struggle, the lessons learned the hard way, all of it had led to this perfect tiny person who would grow up knowing she was loved, knowing she was wanted, knowing she came from a family that had learned, through trial and fire, what it meant to truly see each other. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift any child can receive. Not parents who never make mistakes, but parents who learn from them, who grow, who become better versions of themselves through love and understanding, and the willingness to see beyond their own experience into the heart of another's suffering. The weight Emma carried is the weight all mothers carry. The lesson Jack learned is the lesson all partners need to learn, and the family they became together, imperfect, scarred, but stronger for what they'd endured, is the family we all hope to become when we're tested by life's greatest challenges. This is not just their story. It's the story of every woman who has ever felt invisible in her suffering, and every partner who has ever had their eyes opened to what they'd been too blind to see. It's a reminder that empathy isn't just feeling sorry for someone, it's feeling with them, walking beside them, carrying what they carry even when we can't fully understand. And in the end, that's what love is. Not the easy moments when everything is perfect, but the hard moments when we choose to see, to believe, to support, to be present even when it's difficult, even when we'd rather look away. Even when acknowledging someone else's pain means facing our own failures. Jack learned that lesson through a dream, but you don't need a dream to learn it. You just need to open your eyes, to really look at the person beside you, to ask yourself, am I seeing them? Am I believing them? Am I carrying my share? The answer to those questions will shape not just your relationships, but the kind of person you become, the kind of partner you are, the kind of parent you'll be. Choose to see, choose to believe, choose to carry what needs to be carried. That's the lesson. That's the story. That's the truth that Emma and Jack learned, that Grace will grow up knowing, and that we all need to remember when we're tempted to look away from another person's suffering. The weight we carry for each other, that's what makes us human. That's what makes us partners. That's what makes us family. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you've ever felt unseen in your suffering, know that your experience is valid, your pain is real, and you deserve a partner who sees you. And if you've ever been the partner who didn't see, who didn't understand, who dismissed someone's pain, it's never too late to open your eyes, to learn, to become the person your partner needs you to be. What would you have done in Emma's situation? What would you have done in Jack's? Let us know in the comments. And remember, the greatest gift we can give each other is the gift of being truly seen.